Hello and welcome to Buildings of Tomorrow. My name is John Lester, and in today's episode we are talking about supervisory control. I'm joined today by James Dice. He is from Nexus. James, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, John.
It's an absolute pleasure. The first chat was great fun, so I'm sure that this chat will be just as exciting. Let's start with a quick introduction of who you are and what Nexus is. Give us an overview.
Yeah, so Nexus is a media company, a consultancy, and now an online school. We have an online course that's launching in the fall. The media company portion is a weekly newsletter, comes out every Tuesday on the state of the industry and things I'm excited about that week. And then a podcast on Thursday. So I interview CEOs and thought leaders about the smart buildings industry and how we can move it forward.
Beautiful. Thank you. So if you get the chance or you're interested in the kinds of topics we're going to talk about today and that we've talked about in the past, head to nexus.substack.com, subscribe to the newsletter, check out the podcast. There's an introductory course there to try and help people new into our industry kind of navigate the minefield that we have and the speed that our industry is moving. It's a really great place to start. So, and also find James on LinkedIn. It's a great place also to get an update of what's happening and where, and getting the links from there. Perfect. So today we are talking about supervisory control. James, what do we mean when we say supervisory control?
Yeah, I mean every layer or every building automation system rather has a supervisory layer, right? So, in pretty much every building, their supervisory control is happening already. So when we talk about it, it's important to first point out that it's not this cutting edge thing. It's been around for decades. And what I like to talk about is the portion of it that's very, very important for optimizing the operation of the building, very important for making sure that the building is using as little energy as possible, but also that, since we're in the middle of a pandemic, also that things like the ventilation systems are working properly. Those all depend on supervisory control sequences. So at that layer, you have things like your sequences, you have your set points, and you have your schedules. And so those are the three S's that I like to talk about that happen at this layer, and they're core to, like I said, the optimization of the building.
Yeah, perfect. In the last conversation we had, you talked about the three S's quickly as well, and I like that because often when people talk about supervisory control, they default to the futuristic aspect of it, and it's great to remember that our industry was built. If we talk about the building automation industry, at least our industry was built on these building blocks. So supervisory control, as you mentioned, has been around for decades, and it's really the enabler, the building blocks, the first steps that our industry takes that we do on a daily basis. Now, obviously, this is an important topic. It's something that you focus on and you enjoy to talk about. Why do you think it's so important? Why is it something that we as an industry should know more about and understand better?
Yeah, I think it's because there's a gap, and the gap is, given how important this layer of any system is, and then the gap is like it's actually a little bit neglected, right? So I think that people don't understand how important it is, and maybe they do, but it's not implemented very well. So if you think about a portfolio of buildings, that layer, it really is. I just want to be frank with you, John. It's just not implemented very well. There aren't standards. There aren't standard set points. There aren't standard sequences. The sequences that are installed are not up to today's standards as far as the optimization of the building. They're not up to today's energy codes. And then the schedule. So the schedule is the number one thing you can do to save energy in a building. And often the schedule is either overridden or not as aggressive as it could be. And so that layer really it could use some improvement in most of the buildings.
Yeah. I think that's important for us to recognize as well, because any technology, any solution, any piece of innovation is only as good as the application, and I think it's good for us to accept that as an industry this is not always done well, or or perhaps it was done well in that building that's now existed for 15 years or 20 years, and expectations have changed, or the industry and what we know and what we've learned has also changed, and it's not always implemented and brought up to that modern standard. Now, I like that. I think that's a really important part, and maybe we jump into that a little bit more. What's the major challenge for us to get this part right? Because we really are talking about the basis. How can we as an industry improve our application and the quality of the implementation of the 3 S's, let's call it?
Totally. Yeah. And this is an area where I think a lot of people are looking at this. So there's several startup companies that are looking at this layer. I think all building automation system vendors are trying to make it easier for building operators to get this part right. So I think it's kind of twofold. So one is what I like to call advanced supervisory control 1.0. So it's just focused on just making sure that there's standards so if you have a portfolio of buildings, which I think most of our listeners come from that perspective, where you have a portfolio. Across that portfolio, there's going to be perhaps several different types of building automation systems, all doing supervisory control different. So I think the first step is just sort of standardizing and maybe consolidating that layer down into one user interface for the building operator or the portfolio, the managers managing the portfolio. So getting to where you have one central location for schedules. And so think about like where we are right now in the pandemic. I've heard from a lot of building owners that it's really difficult to say, maybe you have 1,000 buildings, and it's really difficult to change the schedules. So like say grocery store, for instance, the grocery stores have been changing their hours during the pandemic over and over and over again. Right. And like basically changing the schedules across an entire fleet of grocery stores is a manual operation in most buildings, right? And in most portfolios. So just consolidating that layer to make it easier to roll out changes and standardize these really important sequences as well.
Yeah, and now is a great time to talk about this kind of stuff because things are changing so quickly. It's not, grocery store is a great example. The opening hours, could also be limitation on number of people. If you can only have 5 people or 10 people in a particular store this week, and then that doubles or changes to 50 next week, there's a huge impact on how that building is run, and the expectations or the decisions that have to be made by the system to do that effectively. And if things aren't changed, and let's be honest, like you were before, some buildings aren't updated yearly, some buildings aren't updated every 5 years. So the fact that now we have this challenge in the industry that use cases and things like thermal loads, things like opening times, things like accessibility are changing on a weekly or a monthly basis is really highlighting the fact that you describe. Some of this stuff is just hard to do, and there's no need for it. So that's you go.
Give another example too. So think about the way that our recommendations around ventilation are changing. So a lot of times that can be a supervisory control sequence that's determining how ventilation is done across a building. Well, if you have to go in and change every air handler separately or every building separately with how you want to ventilate that building, that change is a very difficult change versus if you were able to centralize it and push out changes across the whole portfolio at once. And that's happening across the world right now.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also a challenge for companies to absorb this shift in focus. If you had a company, even if they were doing an exceptional job in driving sustainability and they had a focus on saving energy and that was their prime concern, we look at the world today, that concern has changed, or at least now we have a weighting between not just ensuring that we use the smallest amount of energy, but ensuring that minimal requirements and expectations to make our workplaces safe or to make our spaces safe have to be taken as a priority. And that's a shift not just in a set point or a schedule, but in a control strategy. And that's not easy to do either when you start to try and apply it across multiple buildings, multiple assets, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think the beautiful thing is that as things change, being able to push out these changes it makes you a lot more agile as an organization, because things aren't slowing down anytime soon. And so when you're thinking about this from a portfolio perspective, it's how can this portfolio be more resilient, and standardizing and optimizing that supervisory control layer is a way to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And let's talk in general. Is it possible? Do we have the technology? Have we made the advances and the understanding as an industry to be able to achieve this goal, this automatic rollout, this portfolio-wide implementation? Can we do that today?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of obstacles. I think there are a lot of people are skeptical about it. I'm pretty bullish. I think the market's ready for at least that first level, because, like I said, it's not really changing much about the way we're doing things now. It's more doing things better, right? Yeah. So I think for at least that 1.0 shift that we're talking about, let's do this layer a little bit better. I think there's portfolio. It's examples of portfolios I could give. I just did an interview series with a consulting engineer here in America. He implements this sort of strategy with all of his clients who have very large portfolios, and I'd say it's being done successfully for sure.
Perfect. So we can do it. We know how to do it, and the technology exists for us to do this in a scalable manner. So that's a good challenge for us as an industry to try and work out how can we do that, knowing that so much of our building stock, so much of the chances for us to realise those savings are out there in the legacy world, that the brownfield sites that we need to try and get to and understand how we can make those changes. Now that's supervisory control, advanced supervisory control 1.0. What's after that? What's the next step, or 2.0 from your perspective?
Yeah, great question. And I think what I didn't say earlier is that this advanced supervisory control is another acronym that, and in an industry that doesn't really need any more acronyms. So yeah. I've been apologizing for the ASC acronym, but there wasn't really something to convey this trend of startups and trend of applications that are really beyond what the building automation system can do. So when we talk about how 1.0 it's basically just doing what we've been doing better. 2.0 would be these newer tools that are popping up on the marketplace that they often come with a lot of buzzwords themselves. So it's where you start getting into AI and machine learning and predicting things like that, where you're doing something that hasn't been done before, and you're really handing over control of the building to an algorithm, right? Yeah. For the first time. It's doing things that we might not understand. And so I think there's actually a lot more skepticism of this jump. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, though, there is a lot of potential to it. So these sorts of technologies, what they're talking about doing is, as the building systems get more complicated, so not only do we have all these more sophisticated control sequences, we're also bringing on things like distributed energy resources. We're also bringing on things like energy storage, right? So your control sequences in the building are getting a lot more complicated, and they're only going to get more complicated. So what this layer says is, these tools are coming online to basically then predict where the building's going to be at in a few hours and dynamically change the control sequence based on what the building needs to do in the future, right? Yeah. So, and it's really important when you start to think about, I think you had an episode in the past a couple times about buildings interacting with the grid.
Yeah.
Well, that is a very difficult thing for a control sequence of the past to be able to do. Control sequences of the past weren't really built to weigh all these different factors and make decisions in real time like this, that sort of interaction is going to require. So ASC 2.0, I would advise people to not totally write it off, because I think in order to in order to reach some of our goals from a climate change perspective, I think we have to get to where that grid interaction is happening and the modulation of different loads. And this is all very futuristic at this point for most building owners, right? But in the future, making those decisions in real time to be able to charge the battery or use solar or, use chilled water storage in the right way at the right time. Things like that are going to be important for getting our building stock to, interact with the grid and make the grid more stable.
Yeah, definitely. We touch a lot of different topics there, and maybe the one I'll grab on is this complexity. And no matter what you do, no matter how well implemented technology is, no matter how advanced that technology is, when you start to broaden the scope, and you start to interact with more and more components, especially when we start to interact with systems beyond our traditional understanding, let's call it, the complexity has to come. And it's more about us trying to do that sustainably and find a way to still, we talked right at the start of this episode about having systems that make relatively simple changes easier to implement, still trying to maintain that usability, maintain that simplicity in operation, while in the background absorbing so many more variables that we have to start to consider. That's a massive challenge for us. And I like the fact that you say don't write it off, because certainly, it's something that, let's call it, as an industry in general, we talk about, but it could be one of those things that we talk about that we don't fully understand, or we don't yet completely recognize the implications of trying to deliver this. But I tend to agree. I think from at least my perspective, and I've been lucky to have conversations with a lot of people that also have this future focus, and they're in the same boat. I think it can be done, and it's there for us to recognize and realize some of the savings that we know we need to make, and to achieve some of the goals that we have as an industry to support the activity that we're having as a society. And it can be a little bit scary when we start to talk in those kinds of scopes and those sort of areas, but we can't avoid it if we want to really have the implications or the impact that we know that buildings can have. We often banter around, buildings use 40% of the world's energy. Like every incremental saving can have a significant impact when we're able to achieve some of the things that we dream about in this stage. James, thank you so much. I love it. Beautiful. Look at us. Onto it. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Absolute pleasure. Remember, everyone, if you're interested in some of the topics we're talking about, don't just subscribe to us here at Buildings of Tomorrow, wherever you're listening to us, or check us out on YouTube, but also head to nexus.substack.com. Check out the newsletter, check out the podcast, and connect with James on LinkedIn so that you can see a lot of these discussions. One of the things I really like, James, you've got a really active and conversational network. There's a lot of people bringing good ideas and having really good and active debates and in-depth conversations about some of these topics. So if you're interested, do yourself a favor, check him out there and participate in the conversation, because no matter what we do, that conversation and the collaboration between ourselves and the industries around us is essential if we're going to achieve any of these things that we talked about today. So bring it on. So thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode, and we'll see you soon.